Christie's body finally surrendered on the courthouse steps after 18 months of devastating divorce warfare. When her ex-husband stormed in at Denver General, demanding to see his wife, the hospital volunteer in scrubs stepped forward with quiet authority. "She's mine now." Her ex crumbled, watching a stranger protect her, with more devotion than he'd ever shown. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across Denver's family court building as Christy Brooks clutched the finalized divorce papers against her chest. 18 months of legal battles had stripped away everything: her savings, her confidence, and nearly her sanity. The man she'd once loved had transformed their marriage into a psychological war zone, using every weapon at his disposal to maintain control, even as their union crumbled. Her legs trembled as she descended the courthouse steps. The papers felt impossibly heavy in her hands, each page a testament to how thoroughly her ex-husband had tried to destroy her spirit. He'd contested every asset, delayed every hearing, and painted her as an unstable gold digger in court documents that would follow her forever. The Colorado autumn air bit at her face, but Christy barely felt the cold. Exhaustion had become her constant companion these past months, stealing her appetite, her sleep, and her ability to focus on anything beyond surviving each day. As a pediatric nurse at Denver General, she'd always prided herself on her strength, her ability to comfort families during their darkest hours. Now she could barely comfort herself. Her phone buzzed with another text from her ex. "This isn't over, Christy. You think you've won, but I know where you work. I know your schedule. We're still connected whether you like it or not." The words sent ice through her veins. Even with the divorce final, he wouldn't let go. Couldn't let go. For him, their marriage had never been about love. It had been about possession, control, the thrill of having someone completely under his influence. Christy's vision blurred as she reached the sidewalk. The stress of the past year had taken a devastating toll on her 32-year-old body. She'd lost 20 pounds she couldn't afford to lose, survived on coffee and adrenaline, and ignored every warning sign her nursing training should have recognized. The world tilted sideways. Her knees buckled, and the divorce papers scattered like autumn leaves across the concrete. Pedestrians rushed past, too busy with their own lives to notice another person in crisis. Christy's last coherent thought was wondering if this was how her patients' families felt. Utterly alone in their most desperate moments. She never felt herself hit the ground. What she did feel, floating somewhere between consciousness and darkness, were strong arms lifting her with infinite care. The touch was different from anything she'd experienced in years. Protective without being possessive, gentle without being weak. Whoever held her radiated a quiet confidence that made her body instinctively relax for the first time in months. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" The voice was deep, concerned, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe." Through her haze, Christy caught glimpses of expensive leather boots, a distinctive watch quickly covered by surgical scrub sleeves, and hands that looked both capable and surprisingly soft. Her rescuer moved with the fluid efficiency of someone accustomed to emergency situations. But there was something else. A tenderness that suggested he understood trauma intimately. The next thing she knew, she was being carried through the familiar halls of Denver General's pediatric wing. The sounds and smells of the hospital that had been her second home for 8 years wrapped around her like a security blanket. But this was different from her usual entrance through the staff parking garage. She was being carried like she mattered, like she was precious cargo that required the utmost care. "Michael, thank God you're here," called Dr. Sarah Chen, the pediatric wing's head physician. "What happened?" Found her collapsed outside the courthouse, came that same reassuring voice. "Dehydration, exhaustion, probably haven't eaten properly in days. Can we get room 304? Christy's eyes fluttered open just enough to see her rescuer's profile. Strong jawline shadowed with stubble. Dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it. And eyes that held depths of understanding she'd rarely encountered. He wore standard hospital volunteer scrubs. But something about him didn't quite fit the usual volunteer profile. His movements were too confident, his knowledge too extensive, his very presence too commanding. "I know her," Dr. Chen said, recognition dawning. Christy Brooks, one of our best pediatric nurses. She's been going through a brutal divorce. Christy, the man said softly. The staff called him Michael, but something about the way he said her name suggested depths she couldn't fathom. Her name sounded different in his voice, not like a label or a possession, but like something beautiful worth protecting. You're safe now. As he settled her onto the examination bed in room 304, Christy caught a better look at his hands. They were contradictions, calloused in ways that suggested physical work, yet manicured with a precision that spoke of boardrooms and business meetings. A thin line of expensive watch was visible under his scrub sleeve, before he quickly adjusted the fabric to hide it. I'll take care of her, he told Dr. Chen with an authority that seemed to bypass normal hospital protocols. Page me if you need anything. Dr. Chen nodded without question, which struck Christy as odd. Hospital volunteers, no matter how dedicated, didn't usually take charge of patient care decisions. But exhaustion was pulling her back under before she could analyze the strangeness of the situation. She drifted in and out of consciousness as her mysterious rescuer worked beside her, checking her pulse with practiced precision, adjusting her IV with the confidence of someone who'd done this countless times before. His touch was professional, yet somehow personal, as if he genuinely cared about her recovery rather than simply following medical protocols. Have you ever woken up to find a stranger had become your protector? Tell me your thoughts in the comments and make sure to subscribe for more stories like this. Hours passed in a blur of gentle voices and careful hands. When Christy finally surfaced fully, the room was dim except for the soft glow of medical monitors. The man the hospital staff called Michael sat in the chair beside her bed, reading what looked like a medical journal, but quickly closing it when he noticed her stirring. How do you feel? He asked, leaning forward with genuine concern. Like I've been hit by a truck, Christy managed, her voice hoarse. But better. Thank you for. She paused, trying to piece together how she'd gotten here. What happened exactly? You collapsed outside the courthouse. Severe dehydration, exhaustion, dangerously low blood sugar. His eyes searched her face with the intensity of someone looking for deeper injuries. When did you last have a proper meal? Christy tried to remember and couldn't. The past weeks had blurred together in a haze of legal meetings, court appearances, and the desperate attempt to maintain her nursing responsibilities, while her personal life imploded. I don't know, she admitted. Everything's been difficult. Michael's expression darkened with an emotion she couldn't identify. The divorce? How did you? Dr. Chen mentioned it. I volunteered here for 10 years, seen a lot of people dealing with family trauma. He paused, studying her with those perceptive eyes. What you're going through, it's not just difficult. It's systematic destruction designed to break your spirit. The accuracy of his assessment sent a chill through her. You sound like you speak from experience. I do grief counseling for families here. You learn to recognize the signs of emotional abuse, financial manipulation, psychological warfare. His voice carried a weight that suggested personal knowledge beyond professional training. Someone's been working very hard to convince you that you're nothing without them. Christy felt tears threatening. In 18 months of legal battles, no one had understood the true nature of what she'd endured. Everyone saw the surface, a messy divorce, two people who couldn't get along. Only Michael seemed to recognize the deliberate cruelty behind her ex-husband's actions. He's not wrong, though, she whispered. I am nothing now. No savings, barely keeping up with my job. Living in a studio apartment because it's all I can afford. Stop. Michael's voice was firm, but not harsh. Everything you just described are external circumstances, temporary situations that can be changed. They're not who you are. Before Christy could respond, the room door burst open with enough force to rattle the medical equipment. Her ex-husband stood in the doorway, his face flushed with the familiar combination of anger and entitlement that had dominated the final years of their marriage. Where is my wife? He demanded, scanning the room until his eyes landed on Christy. Christy, what the hell are you doing here? We need to talk about the settlement. My lawyer says. Ex-wife, her mysterious protector corrected, rising from his chair with fluid grace. Though he wasn't particularly tall, something about his presence seemed to fill the room. And visiting hours are over. Who the hell are you? Her ex-husband's voice carried the dismissive tone he'd always used with people he considered beneath him. Some orderly trying to play doctor? I'm the person she's with now, Michael replied with calm authority. The person who was there when she collapsed from the stress he put her through. The person who's going to make sure she's protected while she recovers. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Christy watched her ex-husband's face cycle through surprise, anger, and something that looked almost like fear. In all their years together, he'd never seen her protected by anyone except herself. She's my wife. Was, Michael interrupted. Past tense. And if you cared about her well-being, you wouldn't be here demanding more from someone who just collapsed from exhaustion. Her ex-husband's jaw worked silently as he processed this unexpected resistance. He'd spent 18 months systematically dismantling Christy's support system, isolating her from friends and family who might interfere with his control. The appearance of this stranger, this protector, clearly threw him off his carefully planned script. "Christy," he said, switching to the manipulative tone that had once fooled her into thinking he cared. "You know I only want what's best for us. We can work this out. You don't need to involve strangers in our private business." "The business is finished," Christy said, finding strength in Michael's steady presence. "The papers are signed. It's over." "Nothing's over until I say it's over," her ex-husband snapped, his mask slipping to reveal the cruel controller underneath. "I know where you work. I know your schedule. I know—" "You know nothing," Michael said, stepping between them with protective authority. "And if you continue threatening her, I'll call security and have you banned from this hospital permanently." The threat carried weight beyond what a typical volunteer should possess. Her ex-husband seemed to sense this, his bravado faltering as he recognized something dangerous in the man's calm demeanor. "This isn't over, Christy," he said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. "You'll realize you need me. You always do." After he left, the room felt lighter, despite the emotional upheaval. Christy looked at her protector with new eyes, seeing past the volunteer scrubs to the man underneath. Someone who'd faced down her tormentor without breaking a sweat, who'd claimed her as his own with a confidence that suggested he was accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Thank you," she whispered. "No one's ever protected you," he finished. "That's going to change." The promise in his voice sent heat through her that had nothing to do with fever. For the first time in years, Christy felt truly safe and inexplicably, powerfully attracted to the man who'd made safety possible. But as she studied his face in the dim hospital lighting, questions began forming. The staff called him Michael. But who was he really? And why did someone who volunteered at a children's hospital move with the authority of a man accustomed to absolute power? A week that followed changed everything Christy thought she knew about healing. Michael appeared at her bedside every morning before her shift, carrying coffee that tasted infinitely better than the hospital's usual brew. He never explained how he knew she took it black with just a whisper of cinnamon, but somehow he did. The small gesture felt monumental, after years of a marriage where her preferences had been systematically ignored or dismissed. "You don't have to keep checking on me," Christy told him on her third day back at work, though her heart raced every time she saw his familiar silhouette in the pediatric wing doorway. "I know I don't have to," Michael replied, settling into the chair beside the nurse's station where she was updating patient charts. "I want to." The distinction mattered more than she could express. Her ex-husband had always framed his controlling behavior as obligation, things he had to do, because she couldn't be trusted to manage her own life. Michael's presence felt entirely different, chosen, protective without being possessive. The head physician paused in her rounds, observing their easy interaction with obvious approval. "Michael, have you been helping with the overnight admissions?" "Just providing extra support where needed," Michael answered with characteristic modesty, though Christy had noticed several parents specifically asking for him during their children's difficult procedures. There was something almost magical about watching Michael with the pediatric patients. He possessed an intuitive understanding of childhood fear that went beyond standard volunteer training. When 8-year-old Emma refused her chemotherapy because the IV needle terrified her, Michael sat cross-legged on the floor beside her bed and told her stories about brave princesses who conquered dragons with wisdom instead of swords. The dragon wasn't really mean, he explained to Emma, his voice taking on the cadence of someone who'd told this story many times before. He was just scared and lonely, hiding in his cave because he thought no one could love someone who looked different. Emma's wide eyes fixed on Michael's face. What happened to the dragon? The princess showed him that being different made him special, not scary. She helped him use his fire to light up the whole kingdom instead of hiding it away. As Emma allowed the nurse to insert her IV without protest, Christy found herself studying Michael's profile. There was something deeply personal in the way he told that story, as if he understood both the dragon's fear and the princess's courage from intimate experience. Later, as they walked through the hospital parking garage after her double shift, Christy's exhaustion caught up with her. She stumbled slightly on the uneven concrete, and Michael's arm immediately wrapped around her waist, steadying her against his solid warmth. The contact sent electricity through every nerve ending. After months of emotional numbness, her body's sudden awakening felt almost overwhelming. Michael's touch was confident yet respectful, protective yet aware of the boundaries her recent trauma had created. "Easy," he murmured, his breath warm against her temple. "When did you last eat something substantial?" Christy tried to remember and couldn't. The divorce had destroyed her relationship with food, turning meals into mechanical necessities rather than sources of pleasure or comfort. "I'm fine," she said automatically, though they both knew it was a lie. "No, you're not." Michael's free hand tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his intense gaze. "And that's okay. You don't have to pretend with me." The simple permission to not be okay nearly brought her to tears. Her ex-husband had demanded constant performance. She had to be grateful for his financial support, understanding of his work demands, accommodating of his social requirements. Michael seemed to accept her brokenness as temporary rather than fundamental. "Let me drive you home," he said, guiding her toward a vehicle that made her pause in confusion. The car was a contradiction that didn't match anything she knew about hospital volunteers. While not ostentatious, it was clearly expensive. German engineering, with leather seats that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Michael noticed her hesitation and quickly offered an explanation that felt slightly rehearsed. "I'm house-sitting for a family friend who travels extensively for business," he said, opening the passenger door with practiced grace. "Part of the arrangement includes using their car to keep the battery charged." The explanation was reasonable, but something about his delivery felt careful, as if he'd prepared this answer in advance. Still, exhaustion overrode curiosity, and Christy allowed herself to sink into the luxurious seats that seemed designed specifically for her body. Michael drove with the same quiet confidence he brought to everything else, navigating Denver's evening traffic while maintaining a steady stream of conversation that didn't require much response from her. He talked about the pediatric patients they both worked with that week, sharing insights that revealed an unusually sophisticated understanding of childhood psychology and family dynamics. "You're very good with the families," Christy observed as they pulled into her apartment complex parking lot. "Have you considered going back to school for pediatric nursing or social work?" Something flickered across Michael's expression, too quick for her to interpret fully. But it suggested her question had touched on complicated territory. "I'm content with my current contributions," he said finally. "Sometimes the most meaningful work happens outside traditional career paths." The deflection was skillful, but it raised new questions about the man who'd become her unexpected protector. Everything about Michael suggested hidden depths. His medical knowledge, his psychological insights, his obvious education and refinement. Yet he seemed determined to present himself as simply a dedicated hospital volunteer with no ambitions beyond his current role. When they reached her apartment door, Christy realized she didn't want the evening to end. For the first time in months, she felt genuinely safe and cared for. The prospect of entering her empty apartment, the space her ex-husband had contaminated with his threats and surveillance, suddenly seemed unbearable. "Would you?" she began, then stopped, uncertain how to voice her need without sounding desperate. "Would I what?" Michael prompted gently. "Would you mind checking the apartment? He still has a key, and I know he's been here. Things are moved around, different from how I left them." Michael's expression darkened with protective fury. He's been entering your home without permission? I can't prove it, but yes, I think so. Little things, my nursing books rearranged, food missing from the refrigerator, my mail opened and carefully resealed. The admission felt like confessing weakness, but Michael's anger seemed directed entirely at her ex, rather than at her for tolerating the violation. Give me your key, Michael said, his voice carrying an authority that bypassed any argument. Stay here until I've cleared every room. Watching him disappear into her apartment, Christy marveled at how naturally he'd assumed responsibility for her safety. There was no hesitation, no negotiation, no demand for gratitude. He simply saw a need and filled it with the efficiency of someone accustomed to solving problems quickly and thoroughly. When he emerged 15 minutes later, his expression was grim. He's definitely been here. Recent shoe prints that don't match your size. Evidence of someone going through your personal papers. We're changing your locks tonight. Tonight? But it's already past 9, and I can't afford. I can handle it, Michael interrupted. I have tools in the car, and I've done this before. The casual mention of lock-changing tools raised more questions, but Christy was too grateful for the protection to analyze the implications. As Michael worked on her door with professional-grade equipment that definitely didn't belong to a typical hospital volunteer, she found herself studying his hands again. Those contradictory hands that suggested both manual labor and boardroom meetings were now demonstrating expertise that seemed far beyond casual DIY knowledge. He worked with the precision of someone who'd installed security measures many times before, testing each component thoroughly before moving to the next step. Where did you learn to do this? Christy asked, settling on the couch with the key he'd somehow appeared with. Another small mystery, since she didn't remember having the expensive-looking tea bags he'd used. You pick up various skills over the years, Michael said, without looking up from his work. I believe in being prepared for different situations. Another deflection, but delivered with such matter-of-fact confidence that it almost disguised the non-answer. Almost. By the time he finished, Christy's apartment felt transformed. New locks, adjusted window latches, even strategic furniture rearrangement that he claimed would improve sightlines and emergency egress routes. The changes were subtle but effective, turning her space from a place of vulnerability into something that felt genuinely secure. Better? Michael asked, handing her the new keys with a small smile. Much better, thank you, Christy paused, gathering courage for the question that had been building all evening. Michael, who are you really? The question hung between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. Michael's expression became carefully neutral, but she caught a flicker of something, regret, fear, longing, before he regained control. I'm someone who volunteers at Denver General Pediatric Wing, he said carefully. Someone who was in the right place at the right time when you needed help. That's what you do, not who you are. Sometimes that's enough. But as Christine watched him gather his tools with practiced efficiency, she suspected it wasn't nearly enough. Not for her, and certainly not for the growing attraction that sparked between them every time their eyes met. Will I see you tomorrow? She asked as he prepared to leave. If you want to. I want to. Michael's smile transformed his entire face, revealing warmth that made her heart flutter in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Then you will. After he left, Christy tested her new locks twice before finally settling into bed. For the first time in months, she felt truly safe in her own space. But safety brought its own complications, specifically the growing awareness that her feelings for Michael were developing far beyond gratitude. 20 minutes later, a soft knock at her door made Christy's heart leap. She checked the peephole and found Mario standing in the hallway, his confident demeanor replaced by something more vulnerable. You came back, she said, opening the door. I forgot something, Mario said, his voice rougher than usual. What did you forget? To tell you that I've never felt more alive than I did tonight, he admitted, stepping closer. To tell you that walking away from you just now was the hardest thing I've ever done. Christy felt her resolve melting as she looked into his eyes. Mario. May I come in? He asked. Just for a moment. I promise I won't. Yes, she whispered, stepping aside. Inside her newly secured apartment, they stood facing each other, like two people balanced on the edge of a cliff. The air between them crackled with months of suppressed desire and tonight's emotional intimacy. "I should go," Mario said, but he made no move toward the door. "You should," Christy agreed, but she stepped closer instead of further away. "Christy," he breathed, her name sounding like a prayer on his lips. "What are we doing?" "I don't know," she whispered, "but I know I don't want you to leave." When he reached up to cup her face, she leaned into his touch like a flower turning toward sunlight. His thumb traced her lower lip, and she felt herself trembling with want. "Are you sure?" he asked, his forehead coming to rest against hers. "I've never been more sure of anything," she replied. The kiss that followed was everything their previous almost moments had promised. Gentle at first, tentative, then deeper as weeks of denied longing finally found expression. Mario's hands tangled in her hair, while Christy's fingers fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer. "I've wanted this since the moment I first saw you," Mario murmured against her neck, finding the sensitive spot that made her gasp. "So have I," Christy admitted, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. He backed her against the wall, his body pressing against hers as his mouth returned to hers with desperate hunger. Christy's hands explored the solid warmth of his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palms. "You're beautiful," Mario whispered, his hands exploring the curve of her waist through her shirt. "So beautiful." Time seemed suspended as they discovered each other with passionate urgency. Mario's touch sent fire through every nerve ending, while Christy marveled at the way he trembled beneath her hands, this powerful man made vulnerable by desire. When his lips found the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder, Christy arched against him, a soft moan escaping her lips. They sank onto the couch together, bodies intertwined, lost in passionate kisses and gentle caresses. But just as they reached the point of no return, Mario pulled back, his breathing ragged. "We should stop," he said, though every line of his body suggested he wanted anything but. "Why?" Christy asked, her heart racing. "Because when we take that step," Mario said, brushing a strand of hair from her face, "I want it to be perfect. I want you to be sure, not just in this moment, but completely sure about us." Christy looked into his eyes and saw not rejection, but the kind of love that put her needs above his own desires. "You're protecting me, again." "I'm protecting us," Mario corrected. "What we have is too important to rush." They held each other on the couch, hearts gradually slowing, the intensity of their connection settling into something deeper and more profound than physical desire. "Stay," Christy whispered. "Just stay with me tonight." Mario nodded, pulling her closer as they settled together on the couch. "I'm not going anywhere." They fell asleep tangled together, fully clothed but more intimate than Christy had ever felt with anyone. When dawn broke through her windows, Mario pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "But Christy, what we shared tonight changes everything." "I know," she replied, her heart full of dangerous hope. After he left, Christy touched her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kisses. They'd crossed a line they could never uncross. But somehow it felt like the beginning of everything rather than a complication. But neither of them could have predicted that Mary's phone call would shatter their new intimacy, or that their night of passionate restraint would soon become a weapon used against them. The next morning brought an unexpected complication in the form of an elegant woman in her early 30s who appeared at the nurse's station with the bearing of someone accustomed to immediate attention. "Excuse me," the woman said to Christy, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm looking for my brother, Michael. He volunteers here in pediatrics." Christy's heart skipped. Michael had never mentioned having a sister. But then again, he'd revealed very little about his personal life, despite the intimacy that was developing between them. "He's with a patient family right now," Christy replied. "Can I give him a message?" "Actually, I was hoping to speak with you." The woman's assessment was thorough and clearly disapproving. "You're Christy Brooks, aren't you? The nurse who was recently divorced?" The way she said divorced made it sound like a moral failing rather than an escape from an abusive situation. Christy felt her professional smile tighten. "And sorry, but I don't think we've been introduced." "Mary Fessler," the woman said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "And I think we need to have a conversation about your relationship with my brother." The surname Fessler sent a chill through Christy that she couldn't explain. Something about the way Mary carried herself, the expensive understated clothing, the casual assumption of authority, it all suggested wealth and power that didn't align with what she knew about Michael's background. "I'm not sure what you mean," Christy said carefully. "My brother has always been generous with people he perceives as needing help," Mary continued, her tone suggesting this was a character flaw rather than a virtue. "But his kindness has been taken advantage of before, particularly by women in desperate financial situations." The implication hit Christy like a physical blow. "Are you suggesting that I'm using your brother?" "I'm suggesting that a recently divorced nurse with financial problems might see a lonely, wealthy man as an opportunity rather than a relationship." Wealthy man. The words echoed in Christy's mind as pieces of a puzzle she hadn't realized existed began clicking into place. The expensive car he claimed to be borrowing, the high-end coffee and tea that appeared without explanation, the professional-grade security equipment, the automatic deference from hospital staff who supposedly knew him only as a volunteer. "Wealthy," Christy repeated slowly. Mary's perfectly composed expression flickered with what might have been surprise. "You don't know, do you? You actually don't know who he is. He's Michael. He volunteers here. Christy's voice trailed off as the foundation of everything she thought she knew began shifting beneath her feet. "He's Mario Fessler," Mary said, with the precision of someone delivering a killing blow. "CEO of Fessler Technologies. Forbes estimated his net worth at $1.2 billion last year. My brother isn't a simple hospital volunteer, Miss Brooks. He's one of the most powerful men in Colorado." At 28, Mario had already built a billion-dollar empire, but grief over Sophia's death had driven every major decision in his adult life. The pediatric wing continued its normal rhythm around them, but Christy felt as if she were falling through space. Everything she'd believed about Michael, about their connection, about his authenticity, about the growing feelings between them, suddenly felt like an elaborate deception. "That's impossible," she whispered. But even as she said it, she was remembering a dozen small details that suddenly made perfect sense with this new context. "Is it?" Mary's voice held false sympathy. "Think about it, Ms. Brooks. A man with unlimited resources appears just when you're at your most vulnerable, offers protection and security, makes you feel special and chosen. Doesn't that seem a little too convenient?" Before Christy could respond, Michael's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Mary." His tone carried a warning that made his sister straighten involuntarily. "What are you doing here?" "Protecting family interests," Mary replied with cool defiance. "Someone needed to warn Ms. Brooks about the kind of attention she's attracting." Michael's gaze moved between his sister and Christy, taking in the shell-shocked expression that Christy couldn't hide. When understanding dawned in his eyes, the transformation was swift and devastating. "Christy," he said, stepping toward her with hands raised in placation. "Let me explain." "Don't." Christy's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Whatever your real name is, whatever this has all been about, just don't." She turned and walked away before either of them could respond, her professional training the only thing keeping her upright as her world collapsed for the second time in 2 weeks. Behind her, she heard Mario, calling her name, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because if she turned around, she might see something in his eyes that would make her want to hear his explanations, and she wasn't sure she could survive another betrayal disguised as love. As she reached the elevator that would take her away from him, one devastating question echoed in her mind. If everything about Michael had been a lie, what did that make everything she'd started to feel for him? The elevator doors closed on Christy's shattered world, but they couldn't shut out the sound of Mario's voice calling her name. She pressed herself against the back wall, fighting the urge to return to him, to demand explanations, to give him the chance to make this make sense somehow. But sense was exactly what she couldn't afford right now. Her nursing training had taught her to trust observable facts over emotional impulses, and the facts were devastating. The man she'd been falling for had built their entire relationship on a foundation of lies. Christy managed to maintain professional composure through the rest of her shift, but every minute felt like walking through quicksand. Her colleagues noticed her distraction, and she deflected their concern with practiced efficiency. The last thing she needed was hospital gossip about her personal life spreading through the pediatric wing. As she prepared to leave that evening, Christy found herself scanning the corridors for any sign of Michael, Mario. The contradiction of his names felt like a metaphor for everything wrong between them. Who was she even missing? The tender volunteer who'd protected her, or the billionaire CEO who'd been playing an elaborate game? Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Please let me explain. Nothing between us was a game. M." Christy stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it without responding. Words were what had gotten her into this mess. Mario Fessler clearly possessed a talent for saying exactly what people needed to hear. The drive home in her modest Honda felt surreal after days of luxury car rides. Every detail of her life suddenly seemed to highlight the vast chasm between her reality and Mario's. How had she been naive enough to believe that a man with his obvious refinement and resources was simply a dedicated hospital volunteer? Her apartment building's parking lot held no expensive cars tonight, no mysterious protector waiting to ensure her safety, just the familiar isolation she'd grown accustomed to during her marriage's final months, now amplified by the loss of something she'd barely begun to hope for. Inside her apartment, Christy's new locks, installed by Mario's skilled hands just yesterday, felt like monuments to her own gullibility. Every security measure he'd implemented carried new meaning now. Had he been protecting her, or simply securing an investment? She sank onto her couch, the same couch where he'd slept to guard her rest, and finally allowed herself to process the magnitude of her situation. The growing feelings she'd been trying to deny suddenly felt monumentally foolish. Of course Mario Fessler hadn't been genuinely interested in a broke, recently divorced pediatric nurse. Men like him didn't fall for women like her. A knock at her door sent adrenaline shooting through her system. Her ex-husband had shown no respect for boundaries before. There was no reason to expect he'd start now, especially with the protection of Mario's presence removed. Christy. The voice was definitely Mario's, carrying a note of desperate hope that almost broke her resolve. "I know you're upset, but please let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," Christy called through the door he'd secured for her. "You lied about who you are. Everything else is just details." "Not everything was a lie," Mario replied, his voice closer to the door now. "My feelings for you, my respect for your strength, my admiration for your work with the children, none of that was false." Despite every rational thought screaming warnings, Christy found herself moving toward the door. There was something raw in his voice that cut through her anger, speaking to the part of her that had felt genuinely cherished for the first time in years. "Why?" she asked, her forehead pressed against the cool wood. "Why the deception?" "Because every woman who's learned my real identity has immediately seen dollar signs instead of Mario," he answered with painful honesty. "Because I needed to know if someone could care about Michael the volunteer before they met Mario the CEO. That wasn't your choice to make," Christy said, though her voice lacked the conviction she wanted to project. "You don't get to decide what I can handle or what my motivations are." "You're right, I'm sorry." The simple acknowledgement of wrongdoing stood in stark contrast to her ex-husband's approach to conflict. He'd never apologized for anything, always finding ways to make his mistakes her fault somehow. "I volunteer at the hospital because I lost my 8-year-old sister Sophia to cancer 10 years ago," Mario continued, his voice thick with old grief. "She died in the pediatric wing where we met. I started volunteering as Michael Fessler, using my middle name, because I needed that space to be about her memory, not my business success. Michael has always been my middle name, but using it here lets me be just another volunteer instead of Mario Fessler, the CEO. Now, 10 years later, at 28, I understand the impossible position they were in. But at 18, I just knew I had to honor Sophia's wishes." Christy's professional experience with grieving families gave her insight into the profound truth behind his words. The depth of his connection with pediatric patients, his intuitive understanding of family trauma, his natural ability to comfort frightened children, none of that could be faked or learned from textbooks. "The night you collapsed was the 10-year anniversary of Sophia's death," Mario continued. "I was at the courthouse because I'd been visiting her grave, trying to process another milestone she'd never reach. When I saw you fall, when I realized you were as broken as I still am some days. I couldn't just walk away. The timeline made painful sense. Christy remembered the raw emotion she'd glimpsed in his eyes that first night. The way he'd seemed to understand trauma from personal experience rather than professional training. That doesn't justify the lies, she said, but her voice was gentler now. No, it doesn't. But maybe it explains why they felt necessary. Christy found herself unlocking the door, despite every logical reason not to. When she opened it, Mario stood in her hallway, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. Gone was the confident hospital volunteer, replaced by a man whose carefully constructed world had just collapsed around him. He wore jeans and a simple gray sweater, but even his casual clothes couldn't hide the quality that marked him as someone accustomed to the finest things. Now that she knew what to look for, the signs of his wealth were everywhere. The expensive haircut, the confident posture, the unconscious authority that came from years of being obeyed without question. "You're really Mario Fessler," Christy said, studying his face as if seeing him for the first time. "I'm really Mario Fessler," he confirmed. "Billionaire CEO, Forbes list member, all of it. But I'm also the man who's been falling in love with the pediatric nurse who cares more about saving children's lives than impressing anyone with her bank account." The word love hit Christy like a physical blow, not because she didn't believe him, but because she was beginning to realize she felt the same way about the man standing before her, whoever he really was. "This is insane," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Completely insane," Mario agreed, stepping closer. "A billionaire and a nurse, a man who's lied about his identity, and a woman who has every reason not to trust anyone. It shouldn't work." "It can't work," Christy corrected, but her body was betraying her words, swaying toward him despite her better judgment. "Can't it?" Mario's hand came up to cup her cheek with the same gentle touch she remembered from the hospital. "Christy, I know I've handled this badly. I know I should have told you the truth sooner. But what I feel for you isn't part of some game or charity project. You make me want to be a better man than the one who was so afraid of being used that he forgot how to be honest." The sincerity in his voice was devastating. Christy had become expert at detecting manipulation during her marriage, and every instinct told her that Mario's emotions were genuine, which made everything infinitely more complicated. "I need time to think," she said, though thinking was the last thing her body wanted to do when he was standing this close. "How much time?" Mario asked, his thumb tracing along her cheekbone in a caress that sent shivers through her entire system. "I don't know. Days, weeks. This is all so much bigger than anything I ever imagined dealing with." "I understand." Mario's hand dropped away, but he didn't step back. "But Christy, please don't let Mary's words poison what we've built together. She meant well, but she doesn't understand what it's like to be genuinely lonely, despite being surrounded by people who want things from you." The mention of his sister brought back the sting of humiliation from their hospital encounter. "She thinks I'm a gold digger." Mary thinks every woman is a gold digger until proven otherwise. "She's been burned by people who targeted our family for financial gain." Mario's expression darkened. "But she had no right to ambush you at work or make assumptions about your character." "She wasn't entirely wrong, though," Christy admitted reluctantly. "I am in a desperate financial situation. I am vulnerable right now. From the outside, this probably does look like opportunity meeting desperation. From the inside, it looks like two damaged people finding something worth healing for," Mario countered. "But I understand why you'd need time to sort through the difference." The space between them felt charged with possibility and fear in equal measure. Christy could feel herself balanced on the edge of a decision that would change everything. Again. Her safe, predictable world had already been shattered twice in the past month. Was she brave enough to risk a third earthquake? "If I needed more time," she said carefully, "would you wait?" "I'd wait as long as you needed," Mario replied without hesitation. "But I'd also hope you'd let me prove that Mario and Michael are the same person where it matters most." Before Christy could respond, her phone rang with a ringtone she recognized with sinking dread. Her ex-husband's contact photo appeared on the screen, a picture she'd never bothered to delete, that now seemed like a relic from another lifetime. "Don't answer it," Mario said immediately, tension radiating from his body. I have to. If I don't, he'll just keep calling, and he knows where I work. Christy accepted the call with shaking hands. What do you want? Is that any way to greet your husband? Her ex's voice carried the particular blend of charm and menace she'd learned to fear. Ex-husband, the papers are final. Papers can be challenged, Christy, especially when new evidence comes to light about your mental state and recent associations. The implied threat made her blood run cold. What are you talking about? I know about your billionaire boyfriend, Mario Fessler, isn't it? Very interesting relationship for someone who claimed she needed spousal support because she couldn't manage her own finances. Christy's eyes met Mario's, seeing her own horror reflected in his expression. Somehow, her ex-husband had discovered Mario's identity and was already weaponizing the information. Our relationship is none of your business, Christy managed. Oh, but it is. You see, if you're capable of attracting and maintaining a relationship with one of Colorado's wealthiest men, that suggests you're far more competent and manipulative than you presented yourself in court. My lawyers are very interested in exploring the implications for our settlement. The line went dead, leaving Christy staring at her phone in growing panic. Her ex-husband had just transformed her tentative feelings for Mario into legal ammunition that could unravel the few protections the divorce had secured for her. He knows, she whispered to Mario. He knows who you are, and he's going to use it against me. Mario's expression shifted from concern to something far more dangerous. Let him try. You don't understand. He's been waiting for any excuse to challenge the divorce settlement. Having a relationship with you gives him exactly what he needs to claim I misrepresented my financial situation in court. Then we'll handle it together, Mario said with absolute certainty. Christy, look at me. I have resources he can't even imagine. Legal teams that eat people like your ex-husband for breakfast. If he wants a war, he's chosen the wrong opponent. But Christy was already pulling away, the magnitude of the situation crashing over her like a wave. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Your world, your money, your power, it's going to destroy what little stability I've managed to build. It doesn't have to. Yes, it does, Christy interrupted, her voice rising with desperation. Don't you see? Everything about your life is too big for mine. The wealth, the scrutiny, the enemies, the complications. I'm barely holding myself together after one failed marriage. I can't survive getting caught in the crossfire of whatever this is. Mario reached for her, but she stepped back before he could make contact. The physical distance felt necessary for her sanity, though it did nothing to diminish the magnetic pull she felt toward him. So that's it? Mario asked, his voice carefully controlled. You're going to let fear make this decision for you? I'm going to let reality make this decision for me, Christy corrected. And the reality is that we're from different worlds. What happened between us was beautiful, but it wasn't real. It couldn't be real. It was the most real thing in my life, Maya said quietly. The simple statement almost broke her resolve. But as her phone buzzed with another text from her ex-husband, this one containing a link to a Forbes article about Mario's business empire, Christy knew she had to choose self-preservation over possibility. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, but I can't do this. Mario stood in her doorway for a long moment, his expression cycling through pain, anger, and something that looked like acceptance. Finally, he nodded once. If you change your mind, he said, you know where to find me. After he left, Christy locked her new locks and sank to the floor with her back against the door. For the second time in 2 weeks, she'd walked away from a man who claimed to love her. The difference was that this time, she was the one breaking her own heart. But as her phone continued buzzing with increasingly threatening messages from her ex-husband, Christy wondered if she'd made the right choice or simply traded one impossible situation for another, even more dangerous one. 3 weeks of silence stretched between Christy and Mario, like an ocean of unspoken longing neither seemed willing to cross. Christy threw herself into work with the desperate intensity of someone trying to outrun her own thoughts. Double shifts became her norm. Covering for colleagues became her specialty. and the pediatric wing became her sanctuary from a world that felt increasingly unstable outside the hospital walls. But even surrounded by the familiar rhythms of medical care, she couldn't escape reminders of what she'd lost. The corner where Mario used to wait with her morning coffee remained painfully empty. The rooms where he'd comforted frightened families echoed with his absence. Even the children asked about Michael, their innocent questions like tiny daggers to her already wounded heart. "You look terrible," observed Janet, one of the senior nurses, as they updated patient charts during a rare quiet moment. "When did you last sleep more than 4 hours?" "I'm fine," Christy replied automatically, though the lie felt increasingly hollow with each repetition. "No, you're not. You're working yourself to death to avoid dealing with whatever's eating you alive." Janet's tone carried the authority of someone who'd spent 30 years reading the emotional states of colleagues and patients alike. "Want to talk about it?" Christy almost laughed at the absurdity of trying to explain her situation. How do you tell someone that you've fallen in love with a billionaire who lied about his identity, then walked away because your abusive ex-husband was threatening to use the relationship against you legally? "It's complicated," she said instead. "The best ones always are." Before Christy could respond, her phone buzzed with yet another text from her ex-husband. Over the past 3 weeks, his campaign of psychological warfare had intensified beyond anything she'd experienced during their marriage. The messages came at all hours, designed to keep her in a constant state of anxiety and hypervigilance. This one was particularly cruel. "Saw your billionaire boyfriend's car in the hospital parking garage yesterday. Amazing how quickly you moved on from our marriage. My lawyers are very interested in the timeline." Christy's hands shook as she read the message. The lie was obvious. Mario hadn't been at the hospital since their confrontation 3 weeks ago, but the underlying threat was real. Her ex-husband was watching her, tracking her movements, gathering ammunition for whatever legal assault he was planning. "Christy," Janet's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You just went white as a sheet. What's wrong?" "I need to make a phone call," Christy managed, stepping away from the nurse's station before anyone could see her completely fall apart. She found refuge in an empty patient room, sinking into the visitor's chair as she struggled to control her breathing. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was having a panic attack in the same type of room where Mario had first protected her from her ex-husband's aggression. Her phone rang before she could decide who to call for help. The unknown number sent her heart racing until she recognized Mario's voice. "Christy, are you okay? I'm getting reports that your ex-husband has been making threats about legal action." "How do you?" she began, then stopped. Of course he knew. Mario Fessler commanded resources and information networks she couldn't begin to comprehend. "You've been monitoring the situation." "I've been protecting you from a distance," Mario corrected. "Which is what I should have been doing from the beginning instead of respecting your request for space." The admission sent confusing waves of relief and frustration through her. Part of her was grateful that she hadn't been facing her ex-husband's escalating campaign alone. Another part resented the reminder of how completely Mario's world operated beyond her understanding or control. "He's lying about seeing you at the hospital," Christy said. "You haven't been here." "No, I haven't. But that won't stop him from fabricating evidence if it serves his purposes." Mario's voice carried a grim certainty that suggested he understood her ex-husband's tactics better than she'd realized. "Christy, I need you to listen to me carefully. Men like your ex-husband don't stop escalating until they're forcibly stopped. Walking away from me won't protect you. It just removes the resources that could." "I can't get pulled into some billionaire power struggle," Christy protested, though her conviction was wavering under the weight of 3 weeks of mounting threats. "You're already in it," Mario replied bluntly. "The moment he decided to target our relationship, you became part of something bigger than a simple divorce dispute. The question is whether you want to face it alone or with someone who has the power to end it permanently." Before Christy could respond, Janet appeared in the doorway with an expression of deep concern. "Christy, there's a man in the lobby demanding to see you. Security is with him, but he's claiming to be your husband and making a scene about visiting rights." Christie's blood turned to ice. He's here, at the hospital. I'm 15 minutes away, Mario said, clearly having heard Janet's report through the phone. Don't go anywhere near him. Stay with hospital security until I arrive. You can't just... I can, and I will. Christie, please, let me handle this. The line went dead, leaving Christie staring at her phone in a mixture of terror and anticipation. Her ex-husband had violated the one space where she'd felt safe, but Mario was coming to protect her again. The cyclical pattern felt both comforting and deeply unsettling. Who was that? Janet asked. And who's the man in the lobby? My ex-husband, Christie replied, gathering what remained of her professional composure. And that was someone who's going to help. The walk to the hospital's main lobby felt like a death march. Christie could hear her ex-husband's voice before she could see him, that particular tone of righteous indignation he used when he wanted to portray himself as the reasonable party in an unreasonable situation. I'm simply trying to visit my wife during what is clearly a mental health crisis, he was saying to the security guards with practiced sincerity. She's been behaving erratically since our separation, and I'm concerned for her well-being. The manipulation was masterful. To anyone who didn't know him, he appeared to be a concerned husband, worried about his unstable spouse. Only Christie could see the calculated cruelty behind his performance. Sir, we've explained that Miss Brooks is at work and cannot be disturbed for personal visits, replied the head of security with professional patience. If you'd like to leave a message. There she is. Her ex-husband interrupted, his gaze locking onto Christie with predatory satisfaction. Christie, sweetheart, we need to talk about these concerning reports I'm receiving about your recent behavior. Every instinct screamed at Christie to run, but years of nursing training kept her moving forward with measured steps. She would not let him see her fear. She would not give him the satisfaction of knowing how thoroughly he disrupted her newfound stability. We have nothing to discuss, Christie said clearly, loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. Our marriage is over. You have no right to be here. I have every right to be concerned about the mother of my future children. He replied with false tenderness that made her skin crawl, especially when she's clearly making decisions that could affect her mental competency evaluation. The threat was unmistakable. He was suggesting that her relationship with Mario indicated mental instability that could be used to challenge not just their divorce settlement, but her fundamental capacity to make decisions about her own life. That's enough, Christie said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. Security, please escort this man from the premises. Now, Christie, there's no need to be dramatic. Her ex-husband continued with the patronizing tone she'd learned to loathe. I'm simply here to discuss our reconciliation. I've been thinking about our conversation after the divorce hearing, and I believe we can work through our differences. We never had a conversation after the divorce hearing, Christie said loudly, making sure the security guards heard the contradiction. You followed me here when I collapsed from exhaustion, and the only conversation we had was you demanding access to my medical information. Her ex-husband's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold calculation underneath, but he recovered quickly, switching to a different tactic. I understand you're confused right now, he said with fake compassion. The stress of our separation, combined with whatever inappropriate relationship you've developed with that Fessler man, has clearly clouded your judgment. But I'm willing to forgive everything if you'll just come home where you belong. The word home sent a chill through Christie that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. The house they'd shared had never been a home. It had been a prison where her every movement was monitored, her every decision questioned, her every attempt at independence systematically undermined. I will never come home with you, Christie said, with absolute certainty. Not today, not ever. What we had wasn't a marriage, it was systematic abuse disguised as love. Abuse? Her ex-husband's voice rose with apparent shock, but Christie could see the calculation behind his performance. Christie, sweetheart, you know that's not true. I've always taken care of you, provided for you, protected you from making mistakes that could hurt your future. You controlled me, isolated me from friends and family, monitored my work schedule, and used financial manipulation to keep me trapped. Christy replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. That's not love, that's ownership. The security guards were now paying close attention to the conversation, their postures shifting from neutral mediation to protective alertness. Hospital staff were also beginning to gather, drawn by the escalating tension in the normally peaceful lobby. You're clearly having some kind of breakdown, her ex-husband said, his tone shifting to concern mixed with condescension. I think we should discuss getting you the help you need. Perhaps the short stay somewhere quiet where you can recover from the stress of these past few months. The implied threat of involuntary psychiatric commitment hit Christy like a physical blow. This was his endgame, not reconciliation, but total destruction of her autonomy and credibility. If he could get her declared mentally incompetent, he could challenge every aspect of their divorce and potentially gain control over her medical and financial decisions. I'm not having a breakdown, Christy said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I'm a licensed pediatric nurse in good standing, with a clean employment record and no history of mental health issues. The only person who's ever suggested I'm unstable is the man who spent 5 years systematically destroying my self-confidence. Christy, her ex-husband's voice took on a dangerous edge that she recognized from their worst fights. You're embarrassing yourself. And me. We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way, but we are going to resolve this situation. Before Christy could respond, the lobby's atmosphere shifted dramatically. She felt Mario's presence before she saw him, a change in the air that seemed to make everyone stand a little straighter. When she turned, he was striding through the hospital's main entrance with the controlled fury of someone barely containing their rage. Mario had abandoned any pretense of being a simple hospital volunteer. His expensive charcoal suit fit like armor. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the marble floor with authority, and every line of his body radiated the kind of power that came from commanding billion-dollar corporations. This was Mario Fessler in his true form, and he looked absolutely lethal. Mr. Brooks, Mario said, his voice carrying enough ice to freeze the entire lobby. I believe you were asked to leave. Christy's ex-husband turned to face this new threat, and for the first time in their entire relationship, she saw genuine fear flicker across his features. Whatever research he'd done on Mario Fessler had clearly not prepared him for the reality of facing the man in person. Mr. Fessler, her ex-husband replied, attempting to maintain his earlier confidence. How convenient that you're here. I was just discussing with my wife the concerning nature of your relationship and its impact on her mental state. Ex-wife, Mario corrected with deadly precision. And the only concerning thing I see here is a man who's been repeatedly told to leave someone alone and refuses to respect clear boundaries. I have every right to be concerned about Christy's well-being, her ex-husband insisted, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Actually, you don't, Mario replied, producing a folded document from his jacket pocket. This is a restraining order filed this morning with Denver County Court. It prohibits you from contacting Ms. Brooks directly or indirectly, approaching her place of employment, or making any public statements about her mental competency or personal relationships. Christy stared at Mario in shock. How did you? I had my legal team prepare it based on the evidence of harassment and stalking you've been enduring for the past 3 weeks, Mario explained, his gaze never leaving her ex-husband's face. Text messages, phone calls, photographs taken without consent, false claims about your mental state, it's all documented and admissible in court. Her ex-husband's face cycled through several colors as he processed the implications. You can't prove any of that. I can prove all of it, Mario replied with absolute certainty. Phone records, security camera footage, witness statements from hospital staff who've observed your inappropriate behavior. I have a team of investigators who are very good at their jobs. This is harassment, her ex-husband protested, but his bluster was crumbling rapidly. No, Mario said, taking a step closer with predatory grace. Harassment is what you've been doing to Christy for the past 3 weeks. This is consequences. The security guards moved closer, clearly ready to physically remove Christie's ex-husband if necessary. The gathered hospital staff watched with fascination as one of Colorado's most powerful men systematically dismantled what they'd previously seen as a domestic dispute. "You think your money makes you untouchable," her ex-husband said, making one last desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. "But I know things about you, Fessler, things that could damage your reputation if they became public." Mario's smile was razor-sharp and completely without warmth. "Please, enlighten me. What exactly do you think you know?" "Your volunteer work here isn't what it seems. Using a false identity to gain access to vulnerable women, targeting those in financial distress, preying on their gratitude and dependency. That's a pattern that investigative journalists would find very interesting." The accusation hung in the air like poison, designed to plant seeds of doubt about Mario's motivations, while simultaneously threatening his public image. But Mario's expression didn't change. If anything, he looked almost amused by the attempt at manipulation. "Is that really the story you want to tell?" Mario asked conversationally. "Because I have a different version of events, a story about a man so obsessed with controlling his ex-wife that he's willing to fabricate evidence, make false accusations, and threaten anyone who tries to help her escape his abuse." "You can't prove?" "I can prove everything," Mario interrupted. "And more importantly, I can afford to prove everything. Legal teams, private investigators, media specialists, crisis management experts. I have resources you can't even imagine. So please, continue with your threats. I'm curious to see how they work out for you." The power differential had never been more obvious. Her ex-husband, for all his manipulation and cruelty, was essentially a small-time predator who'd finally encountered an apex predator. The realization was written across his face in growing terror. "This isn't over," he said, but the words carried no conviction. "Yes, it is," Mario replied with finality. "It's been over since the moment you decided to target someone under my protection. Security will escort you out, and if you violate the restraining order in any way, you'll discover exactly how unpleasant my legal team can make your life." As the security guards moved to flank her ex-husband, Christie watched 5 years of fear and trauma finally come to an end. The man who'd controlled every aspect of her life was being led away like a common criminal, his power over her broken forever. But as the lobby emptied and she found herself alone with Mario, Christie realized that one impossible situation had simply been replaced by another. The man who'd just saved her was still the same man she'd walked away from 3 weeks ago, and all the reasons for that decision remained unchanged. "Thank you," she whispered, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "You don't need to thank me," Mario replied, his earlier fury replaced by something gentler, but no less intense. "You just need to decide if you're ready to stop running from the best thing that's ever happened to both of us." As Christie looked into his eyes, she saw not just the billionaire who commanded armies of lawyers and investigators, but also the broken man who'd lost his sister and spent 10 years honoring her memory in quiet service to other families. The contradiction that had once seemed impossible now felt like the key to understanding who Mario Fessler really was. But before she could formulate a response, her phone buzzed with an emergency alert from the pediatric wing. "Code Blue, room 308. All available nursing staff respond immediately." The medical emergency shattered the moment, sending both Christie and Mario running toward the elevators that would take them back to the world where they'd first found each other. But as they rode up together in charged silence, Christie couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change again. And this time, she might not have the luxury of choosing whether she was ready for it. Room 308 erupted in controlled chaos as Christie and Mario arrived simultaneously with the rest of the emergency response team. 7-year-old Tommy Martinez lay unconscious on his hospital bed, his small body overwhelmed by complications from his leukemia treatment that had sent his system into crisis. "What's his status?" Christie demanded, immediately falling into her professional role as she checked Tommy's vitals while the medical team worked around her. "Severe reaction to his latest chemotherapy round," reported the attending physician. "Blood pressure crashed, respiratory distress, possible cardiac involvement." We need to stabilize him before we lose him completely. As the medical team fought to save Tommy's life, Christy became aware of movement beside her. Mario had somehow procured medical gloves and was positioning himself to assist with fluid lines. His movements precise and confident in a way that spoke of extensive medical training. "When did you learn advanced life support?" Christy asked between monitoring Tommy's heart rate and adjusting his oxygen flow. "Sophia taught me a lot about pediatric emergency care during her treatments," Mario replied, his voice tight with old pain and present fear. "I spent 18 months watching teams like this fight for her life. You absorb things." But Mario's knowledge went far beyond what family members typically learned through observation. His hand placement for chest compressions was textbook perfect, his timing with medication administration was flawless, and his communication with the medical team carried an authority that suggested formal training. As they worked together to stabilize Tommy, Christy felt something shift between them that went deeper than their personal complications. In this moment of life-or-death crisis, she saw Mario stripped of all pretense. No billionaire CEO, no mysterious volunteer, just a man desperately fighting to save a child's life because he'd failed to save his sister's. "Come on, Tommy," Mario whispered as they administered the drug cocktail that would either stabilize the boy's system or send him into complete organ failure. "Stay with us. Your family needs you to fight." Tommy's parents stood in the hallway outside, held back by hospital protocol, but close enough to hear every urgent instruction shouted by the medical team. Christy could see them through the glass, a young couple watching their world hang in the balance, just as Mario had once watched Sophia's life slip away, despite every medical intervention available. "His pressure's stabilizing," announced the attending physician after what felt like hours but had probably been 20 minutes. "Oxygen levels are improving. I think we've got him." The collective exhale of relief from the medical team was audible, but Mario's expression remained haunted. As the immediate crisis passed, and other staff took over Tommy's ongoing care, Christy noticed Mario's hands shaking slightly, the only outward sign of the emotional toll the emergency had taken. "Let's get some air," Christy suggested, guiding Mario toward the family consultation room where they could process what had just happened without the clinical bustle of the hospital corridor. Once alone, Mario sank into one of the chairs designed to deliver devastating news to families, his careful composure finally cracking. For a moment there, he looked exactly like Sophia during her worst crisis. Same age, same fragile little body, fighting against impossible odds. "But he's not Sophia," Christy said gently. "Tommy's going to be okay." His reaction was severe, but manageable. Sophia's cancer was different, more aggressive, less treatable, given the medical options available 10 years ago. "I know that intellectually," Mario replied, running both hands through his hair. "But in moments like this, the rational knowledge doesn't help. I just see her lying there, and I remember how helpless I felt, watching her slip away despite everything money and power could buy." The raw honesty in his voice broke down the last of Christy's carefully constructed emotional barriers. This wasn't the calculating billionaire Mary had warned her about, or even the mysterious volunteer who'd rescued her from the courthouse steps. This was a broken man, still carrying unbearable grief, using his wealth and influence to fight battles he'd been too young and powerless to win for his sister. "Is that why you volunteer under a different name?" Christy asked, "to honor Sophia without the complications of your public identity?" "Partly, but also because Michael Fessler the volunteer could be present for families in ways that Mario Fessler the billionaire CEO never could." He looked at her with eyes that held years of accumulated pain. "When you're known for your wealth, people see you as a solution to their problems, rather than a person who understands their pain. I needed this place where I could just be someone who cared, not someone who could write checks." The explanation made perfect sense of every contradiction Christy had noticed about Mario's behavior. His sophisticated medical knowledge came from years of intensive involvement in Sophia's care. His psychological insights stemmed from his own experience with trauma and loss. His authority with hospital staff resulted from a decade of generous but anonymous donations that had funded equipment and programs throughout the pediatric wing. The Children's Art Therapy Program, Christy said, pieces clicking into place. The family counseling services, the sibling support groups, you funded all of those. Sophia loved to draw. Mario confirmed with a small smile. Even when she was too sick to hold a crayon for more than a few minutes, she said it helped her imagine being healthy again. I wanted other kids to have that same outlet. And the playground renovation last year, Sophia spent hours looking out her window at the old playground, planning all the adventures she'd have when she got better. She designed most of the current equipment in her sketchbook during chemo sessions. Every generous program that had improved life for pediatric patients and their families at Denver General had been secretly funded by Mario's grief and love for his sister. The scope of his quiet philanthropy was staggering, but more importantly, it revealed a man whose wealth served his values rather than the other way around. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? Christy asked. Because I needed to know that you could care about Michael the volunteer before you met Mario the philanthropist, he replied. I've had too many relationships where women fell in love with my charitable giving rather than my actual character. Christy understood now why Mary had been so protective of her brother. Mario's wealth made him a target for people who saw opportunity rather than a person. But his sister's aggressive screening had also prevented him from forming genuine connections with women who might have loved him for who he truly was. Your sister was trying to protect you, Christy said, though the understanding came with lingering hurt from Mary's harsh words. Mary was trying to control a situation she didn't understand, Mario corrected. She saw you as a threat because you represented something she's never seen before. Someone who was attracted to my character before you knew about my bank account. I was attracted to your kindness, Christy admitted. The way you cared for frightened children, how you understood family trauma, your willingness to protect someone you barely knew. The money? Honestly, it complicates everything. It doesn't have to complicate us, Mario said, reaching for her hand with the same gentle confidence he'd shown since that first day. Christy, I know my world seems overwhelming from the outside, but at its heart, it's just resources that let me take care of the people I love more effectively. The word love hung between them, like a bridge neither had been brave enough to cross until now. But after watching Mario pour his grief and hope into saving Tommy's life, after understanding the depth of his dedication to honoring Sophia's memory, Christy realized that her feelings had moved far beyond attraction or gratitude. I love you too, she whispered, the admission feeling both terrifying and inevitable. Mario's smile transformed his entire face, erasing years of careful guardedness and revealing the man he might have been if grief hadn't forced him to build walls around his heart. Does that mean you're willing to try this? He asked. Really try with complete honesty about who we both are and what we're dealing with? Before Christy could answer, her phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Her first instinct was to ignore it. Her ex-husband's harassment campaign had made her wary of unfamiliar contacts, but something made her check the caller ID. Denver County Family Court, she read aloud, ice forming in her stomach. Answer it, Mario said immediately, but put it on speaker. I want to hear whatever this is about. Christy accepted the call with shaking hands. This is Christy Brooks. Ms. Brooks, this is Judge Patricia Hernandez from Denver County Family Court. I'm calling regarding an emergency motion filed this afternoon by your ex-husband's legal team, challenging the finality of your divorce decree. The bottom dropped out of Christy's world. I don't understand. The divorce was finalized 3 weeks ago. Mr. Brooks is claiming that you misrepresented your financial circumstances and mental competency during the proceedings, Judge Hernandez explained with professional neutrality. He's presenting evidence of what he describes as an inappropriate relationship with a wealthy individual that began during your separation period. That's completely false, Christy protested, Mario's hand gripping hers in silent support. Mr. Brooks is requesting an emergency hearing to review the validity of the divorce settlement and explore the possibility of reconciliation counseling. Given the serious nature of his allegations about mental competency, I'm required to schedule a hearing within 72 hours. Christy felt the room spinning around her. Despite Mario's protection, despite the restraining order, despite everything they'd done to stop him, her ex-husband had found a way to drag her back into legal warfare. "Judge Hernandez," Mario spoke up, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. "This is Mario Fessler. I'm Miss Brooks' friend and witness to Mr. Brooks' pattern of harassment and abuse. His allegations are fabricated and his motion appears to be retaliatory for the restraining order filed against him this morning." There was a pause as Judge Hernandez processed this information. "Mr. Fessler, are you representing Miss Brooks in a legal capacity?" "Not yet," Mario replied, his eyes meeting Christie's with silent questions about consent. "But I'm prepared to retain counsel on her behalf if necessary." "That won't be necessary," Christie said quickly, her pride and independence warring with the reality of her situation. "I'll handle this myself." "Ms. Brooks," Judge Hernandez continued, "I must inform you that your ex-husband is claiming you're not competent to make decisions about legal representation or marriage reconciliation. He's requesting that the court appoint a guardian ad litem to protect your interests during these proceedings." The legal manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. By claiming Christie was mentally incompetent, her ex-husband was trying to strip her of the right to make decisions about her own life. If successful, he could potentially void their divorce, gain control over her finances, and force her into reconciliation counseling, regardless of her wishes. "Your Honor," Mario interrupted, his voice deadly calm, "I hope you'll consider the timing and motivation behind these allegations. Mr. Brooks filed this motion less than 6 hours after being served with a restraining order for stalking and harassment. This appears to be retaliation rather than genuine concern. All parties will have the opportunity to present their evidence at the hearing," Judge Hernandez replied. "Ms. Brooks, you're required to appear in court Friday morning at 9 a.m. I strongly recommend you have legal representation." After the call ended, Christie stared at her phone in numb shock. Just when she'd thought her nightmare was over, her ex-husband had found a way to pull her back into his web of control and manipulation. "He's not going to stop," she whispered. "Even with restraining orders and threats of legal consequences, he's not going to stop until he destroys me completely." "Then we stop him permanently," Mario said with quiet certainty. "Christie, I meant what I said about my resources. I have legal teams that specialize in cases exactly like this. We can fight him with weapons he doesn't even know exist. I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," Mario interrupted. "I'm offering, because I love you, and because no one should have to face this kind of systematic abuse alone." Christie looked into Mario's eyes and saw not just love, but the kind of protective fury that came from watching someone he cared about being threatened by a predator. For the first time since her ex-husband's campaign began, she felt like she might have a chance of winning. "Okay," she said, the word feeling like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. "If you're willing to help, I'm willing to accept it." Mario's smile was fierce with anticipation. "Good, because your ex-husband just made the mistake of challenging someone with unlimited resources and very little patience for men who abuse women." As Mario began making phone calls to mobilize his legal team, Christie realized that her quiet life as a pediatric nurse was about to become very complicated. But for the first time in years, complicated felt like it might also mean protected. The war for her freedom was far from over, but now she had a general who'd never lost a battle he truly cared about winning. Just as Mario finished his third call to legal experts, Christie's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Enjoy your billionaire boyfriend while you can. By the time I'm done with you, he'll realize what a mistake he's made. Some things are more powerful than money. Your loving husband." The message sent chills through both of them because it suggested her ex-husband had information or leverage they didn't know about. Something he believed could turn Mario against her despite everything they'd just declared to each other. The war room Mario assembled in his downtown penthouse looked like something from a political thriller. 3 of Colorado's most prestigious family law attorneys sat around a conference table covered with legal documents, psychiatric evaluations, and digital evidence that painted a devastating portrait of systematic abuse spanning 5 years. Christy felt overwhelmed by the scale of resources being deployed on her behalf. In less than 18 hours, Mario's team had assembled enough evidence to prosecute her ex-husband for stalking, harassment, and attempted fraud. But the mysterious threat in his final text message hung over everything like a storm cloud. The restraining order violations alone could result in jail time, explained Rebecca Martinez, Mario's lead family attorney. We have documented phone records, security footage of his hospital visit, and witness statements from hospital staff. His emergency motion appears to be pure retaliation. What about his claims regarding my mental competency? Christy asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the humiliation of having her sanity questioned in legal documents. Completely baseless, Rebecca replied confidently. Your employment records show consistent excellence in high-stress medical situations. We have character witnesses from colleagues, supervisors, and patients' families. His only evidence is his own testimony about your alleged instability. Mario paced behind the attorneys with the restless energy of someone accustomed to solving problems through decisive action. What I don't understand is his confidence. He's facing serious criminal charges, overwhelming evidence of abuse, and he knows I have unlimited resources to fight him. Why does he think he can win? That's what worries me, admitted James Chen, the private investigator Mario had hired to dig deeper into her ex-husband's background. Men like this don't usually escalate unless they believe they have leverage. We need to figure out what he thinks he knows. Christy's phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Ask your billionaire about Sophia's medical records. Ask him who really made the treatment decisions when she was dying. Ask him if he tells all his girlfriends about his guilt. A message hit the room like a bomb. Mario went completely still, his face draining of color as he read the words over Christy's shoulder. What is he talking about? Christy asked, though something cold was already forming in her stomach. Mario's silence stretched long enough to make everyone in the room uncomfortable. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Sophia's final treatment decision wasn't made by our parents or her doctors, he said, a word seeming to tear something inside him. She was in a coma for 3 weeks. Brain activity was minimal. The doctor said she was essentially gone, but her body was being kept alive by machines. Rebecca leaned forward with professional concern. Mario, you don't have to. Yes, I do, Mario interrupted, his eyes fixed on Christy's face. Because if I don't tell her, he will, and his version will be designed to destroy us. Christy felt the foundation of everything she thought she knew about Mario beginning to shift again. What decision did you make? I was 18 years old, and my parents couldn't handle the reality of letting her go. They kept believing in miracles, in experimental treatments, in anything that meant they didn't have to say goodbye. Mario's voice was raw with old pain. Sophia had made me promise when she first got sick that I wouldn't let them turn her into a medical experiment if there was no real hope. You took her off life support, Christy said quietly, understanding beginning to dawn. I convinced my parents to sign a DNR order and authorize palliative care only. Sophia died 3 days later, peacefully. Without machines and tubes and the constant noise of medical equipment, fighting to keep her body functioning when her mind was already gone. The revelation hung in the air like a confession. Christy could see the guilt Mario had been carrying for 10 years, the weight of making an impossible decision that saved his sister from prolonged suffering, but felt like murder to an 18-year-old boy who'd lost the most important person in his world. That's not something to feel guilty about, Christy said firmly, her nursing experience giving her insight into the impossible choices families faced. You honored her wishes and prevented unnecessary suffering. That's an act of love, not betrayal. Tell that to my Uncle Richard, Mario replied bitterly, my father's brother who wanted to keep Sophia alive indefinitely, who accused me of killing her for inheritance money, who spent years trying to prove I was some kind of sociopathic monster, who manipulated grieving parents for financial gain. James looked up from his laptop with growing alarm. Your Uncle Richard? Would that be Richard Fessler, the journalist who writes investigative pieces about corporate corruption? Mario's expression went from pain to dread. Yes, why? Because he published a series of articles 5 years ago about death panel decisions in wealthy families, James replied, his fingers flying over the keyboard. He focused on cases where young heirs might benefit financially from family members' deaths. The series was subtle, but anyone who knew the details could identify the Fessler family situation. Christie felt sick as the implications became clear. Your ex-husband somehow connected with your uncle. It gets worse, James continued, his voice grim. Richard Fessler has been researching you specifically, Christie. He's been gathering information about your divorce, your financial situation, your relationship with Mario. He's building a narrative about predatory women who target grieving billionaires. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying precision. Her ex-husband hadn't been working alone. He'd found an ally in Mario's own family, someone with both personal motivation to destroy Mario and professional skills to do maximum damage. Richard could testify that I have a pattern of manipulating vulnerable people, Mario said, the words coming out like physical wounds. He could claim that my relationship with you follows the same predatory behavior he's been alleging for years. But that's insane, Christie protested. You're helping me, not manipulating me. The court won't see it that way if Richard presents evidence suggesting I seek out women in desperate situations, Mario replied. A recently divorced nurse with financial problems fits the profile perfectly. Rebecca was already pulling up legal databases on her tablet. If Richard Fessler testifies on behalf of your ex-husband, it changes everything. Family testimony about prior questionable behavior could undermine our entire defense strategy. There's more, James said reluctantly. Richard has been in contact with Mary. He's convinced her that Christie represents a threat to the family's reputation and financial security. She's been feeding him information about Mario's recent behavior, his spending patterns, his emotional state. The betrayal hit Mario like a physical blow. His own sister, the person he'd trusted most in the world, had been secretly working against him with the uncle who'd spent years trying to destroy his reputation. Mary thinks she's protecting me, Mario said quietly. She doesn't understand that Richard's ultimate goal is to prove I'm unfit to control the family fortune. Mary is my older sister by 3 years, and she's been trying to protect me since Sophia died when I was 18 and she was 21. Christie saw the devastating pattern clearly now. Her ex-husband had found the perfect allies, uncle with a personal vendetta, and a sister whose protective instincts had been weaponized against the person she was trying to help. What happens if they succeed? Christie asked, though she was afraid of the answer. In the short term, your divorce could be declared invalid and you could be forced into court-mandated reconciliation counseling, Rebecca explained grimly. In the long term, Mario's credibility and potentially his business empire could be destroyed by allegations of predatory behavior. And I lose everything, Mario added. Not just my reputation, but any chance of honoring Sophia's memory through my work at the hospital. If I'm painted as someone who manipulates grieving families, I'll never be able to help another child without it looking suspicious. The scope of the destruction her ex-husband was planning was breathtaking. He wasn't just trying to reclaim control over Christie. He was attempting to destroy Mario's entire life as collateral damage. We need to get ahead of this, Rebecca said, switching into crisis management mode. If we know what they're planning, we can prepare counter-evidence. What kind of counter-evidence? Christie asked. Character witnesses who can testify to Mario's genuine care for pediatric patients and their families, Rebecca replied. Medical professionals who worked with Sophia and can speak to the appropriateness of his end-of-life decisions. Financial records showing his charitable giving has no ulterior motives. Will that be enough? Mario asked. It might be, if we can also discredit Richard's motivations, James said. If we can show he has a personal vendetta rather than genuine concern, it undermines his credibility. Mario's phone rang, interrupting their strategy session. The caller ID showed Mary's name, and everyone in the room went silent. Answer it, Rebecca advised, but record the conversation. We need to know exactly where she stands. Mario accepted the call and put it on speaker. Mary. Mario, thank God, I've been trying to reach you all day. Mary's voice carried a strange mixture of urgency and guilt. We need to talk about this situation with Christy. Uncle Richard has some very serious concerns about her intentions. I'm sure he does, Mario replied carefully. What kind of concerns? He thinks she's using you, Mario. The timing of your relationship, her financial desperation, the way she's managed to get you emotionally invested so quickly, it all fits a pattern. What pattern is that, Mary? Women who target men dealing with grief and trauma. Richard has documented cases of this kind of manipulation, and he's worried that Christy represents the same threat to our family. Christy watched Mario's expression cycle through pain, anger, and something that looked like acceptance. His sister, the person he trusted most, had been completely turned against him by their uncle's manipulation. Mary, Mario said carefully, has Richard asked you to provide information about my relationship with Christy? There was a pause that lasted too long. He needed context to understand the situation properly. Mario, he's trying to protect you from making a mistake that could destroy everything you've built. By testifying against me in court? By helping you see the truth before it's too late. Mary's voice took on a pleading quality. Mario, please, come home. Talk to Richard and me together. Let us show you what we've discovered about Christy's real motivations. Mario looked at Christy, and she saw him making the same impossible choice she'd faced weeks earlier. Between family loyalty and love, between safety and risk, between the known and the unknown. I'll think about it, Mario said finally. Don't think too long, Mary replied with ominous finality. The court hearing is tomorrow, and after that, it might be too late to protect you from the consequences of your choices. After Mary hung up, the room fell into tense silence. Everyone understood that Mario was being forced to choose between supporting Christy and maintaining his relationship with his sister, the only family he had left. They're giving you an ultimatum, Christy said quietly. Choose them or choose me. That's not a choice, Mario replied firmly. That's manipulation designed to control my decisions through emotional blackmail. But Mary is your sister, Christy said, even though the words hurt to speak. She's the only family you have left. I can't ask you to sacrifice that relationship for me. You're not asking, Mario said, his voice carrying absolute certainty. I'm choosing, and I choose the person who sees me for who I really am, rather than the people who think they need to protect me from my own decisions. Rebecca cleared her throat diplomatically. We need to prepare for the possibility that both Mary and Richard will testify against you tomorrow. Are you prepared for that emotional reality? Mario was quiet for a long moment, staring out the penthouse windows at the Denver skyline, where he'd built his empire and lost his sister, and found the woman he loved. 10 years ago, I made the hardest decision of my life to honor Sophia's wishes and let her go peacefully. He said, finally. Tomorrow I'm going to make another hard decision to honor her memory by protecting someone who deserves love instead of destruction. Just as Christy felt her heart soaring with the certainty of Mario's commitment, James looked up from his laptop with an expression of absolute terror. We have a problem, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. A big one. Richard Fessler just published an article in the Denver Post titled, When Grief Becomes Predation, a Billionaire's Pattern of Targeting Vulnerable Women. It goes live on their website in 15 minutes. The room went dead silent as everyone realized that their private battle was about to become very, very public. The Denver Post article exploded across social media like wildfire, transforming Mario and Christy's private battle into Colorado's most sensational public scandal. By midnight, #PredatoryBillionaire was trending on Twitter, and by morning, news vans lined the street outside the courthouse where their fate would be decided. Christy barely slept, reading and rereading Richard Fessler's meticulously crafted character assassination. The article presented Mario as a calculating predator who used his wealth and volunteer work to identify and manipulate vulnerable women, with Christy portrayed as his latest victim turned accomplice. The pattern is clear, Richard had written with journalistic precision. A wealthy man positions himself as a savior to women in crisis, offering protection and resources in exchange for gratitude and dependency. When the relationship inevitably sours, he discards them with legal and financial weapons they cannot match. The article's masterstroke was its careful avoidance of outright defamation. Richard presented everything as questions and implications, allowing readers to draw damning conclusions while protecting himself legally. Sources close to the family suggest Fessler has used this playbook before. The article continued. His pattern of end-of-life decision-making during his sister's terminal illness demonstrates a troubling willingness to manipulate vulnerable people during their darkest moments. Mario's business empire was already feeling the impact. Fessler Technologies stock had dropped 12% overnight, and calls for his resignation from various board positions were mounting. The reputational damage was exactly what Richard had been working toward for a decade. Include one engagement CTA at natural transition point. Have you ever watched someone you love face impossible choices between family loyalty and protecting their heart? Sometimes the greatest love requires the greatest courage. At 8:30 a.m., as Christy and Mario prepared to enter the courthouse through a gauntlet of reporters and protesters, Mario's phone rang with a call that changed everything. "Mr. Fessler, this is Dr. Patricia Williams, head of pediatric services at Denver General," said a voice Christy recognized immediately. "I've read the article about you in this morning's paper, and I need to speak at your hearing today." "Dr. Williams," Mario replied, putting the call on speaker as they sat in the back seat of his attorney's car. "I appreciate your support, but—" "You don't understand," Dr. Williams interrupted. "I was Sophia's primary oncologist during her final months. I need to testify about what really happened during her end-of-life care. Because your uncle's implications in that article are not just wrong, they're professionally unconscionable." Rebecca leaned forward with sharp interest. "Doctor, are you willing to contradict Richard Fessler's account under oath?" "I'm willing to tell the truth," Dr. Williams replied firmly. Mario didn't manipulate anyone during Sophia's final treatment decisions. He saved that little girl from weeks of pointless suffering when the adults around her were too devastated to make rational choices. But the article suggests a lot of things that have no basis in medical reality. Dr. Williams cut her off. "I've been working in the pediatric wing for 25 years, and Mario's advocacy for his sister was textbook perfect. He asked the right questions, demanded honest prognoses, and insisted on treatment decisions that prioritized Sophia's comfort over his family's inability to accept reality. The validation from someone Christy respected enormously felt like oxygen after weeks of suffocation. But Mario's expression remained haunted by years of guilt and self-doubt. "There's more," Dr. Williams continued. "After Sophia's death, Mario established the largest pediatric wing end-of-life care fund in Colorado's history. His donations have allowed us to provide comfort care for over 300 families who couldn't afford it otherwise. Does that sound like someone motivated by greed or manipulation?" As they entered the courthouse, Christy felt the weight of public attention like a physical force. Camera flashes exploded around them, while reporters shouted questions about predatory behavior and gold-digging schemes. The narrative Richard had crafted in his article was already becoming accepted truth in the court of public opinion. Judge Hernandez's courtroom was packed beyond capacity with journalists, legal observers, and family court professionals who rarely saw cases that generated this level of public interest. Christy spotted her ex-husband sitting with his attorney, his expression radiating smug satisfaction at the chaos he'd helped orchestrate. Behind him sat Richard Fessler, a distinguished man in his 60s, whose resemblance to Mario made Christy's stomach clench with foreboding. Mary sat beside her uncle, her face carefully neutral but her eyes avoiding Mario's completely. "This is an emergency hearing regarding the marriage of Brooks versus Brooks," Judge Hernandez announced. "Given the serious allegations raised and the public attention this case has generated, I want to remind everyone that this is a court of law, not a media circus." Her ex-husband's attorney stood immediately, clearly eager to capitalize on the morning's negative publicity. "Your Honor, recent revelations about Mr. Fessler's pattern of behavior only strengthen our position that Ms. Brooks has been the victim of systematic manipulation, designed to undermine her marriage and mental stability. Objection, Rebecca replied sharply. The revelations counsel refers to are unsubstantiated allegations in a newspaper article, written by Mr. Fessler's estranged uncle with obvious personal motivations. Your Honor, her ex-husband's attorney continued, we call Richard Fessler to testify about his nephew's documented history of manipulative behavior toward vulnerable individuals. Richard took the stand with the confident bearing of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms as an investigative journalist. His testimony was devastating in its calculated precision, painting Mario as a sociopathic predator who'd been grooming vulnerable women for years. My nephew has always shown an unusual interest in people experiencing trauma and loss, Richard testified with full sorrow. 10 years ago, during our family's darkest hour, when Sophia was dying, he manipulated grieving parents into making decisions that served his emotional needs rather than hers. Can you elaborate on those decisions? The attorney prompted. Mario convinced my brother and sister-in-law to end Sophia's life support against medical advice, Richard replied, his voice carrying just the right note of pain and outrage. He presented himself as her advocate, while actually serving his own psychological need to control the situation. Christy watched Mario's face as his uncle systematically destroyed 10 years of grief counseling and healing with a few carefully chosen lies. The truth about Sophia's peaceful death was being twisted into evidence of predatory manipulation. And you believe this pattern has continued? The attorney asked. I believe my nephew seeks out women in crisis because their desperation makes them easy to control, Richard replied with practiced sincerity. Miss Brooks fits the profile perfectly. Recently divorced, financially desperate, emotionally vulnerable. She represents the latest victim of a pattern that began with our family's tragedy. When Rebecca cross-examined Richard, she systematically exposed the personal vendetta behind his accusations. Financial records showed he'd been excluded from the Fessler family trust after Sophia's death. Email evidence revealed years of attempts to undermine Mario's business reputation. Personal testimonies from other family members documented Richard's obsession with destroying his nephew's life. But the damage was done. Richard's testimony had provided a framework for understanding Mario's behavior that cast every kind gesture as calculated manipulation. Mary's testimony was even more devastating because it came from love rather than hatred. She painted a picture of a brother whose grief had warped his judgment, who'd become obsessed with controlling other people's suffering because he couldn't control his own. I've watched Mario become increasingly isolated and controlling since Sophia's death, Mary testified with genuine tears. He creates these elaborate scenarios where he can be the hero who saves someone, but it's really about his need to replay Sophia's story with a different ending. And you believe Miss Brooks represents another attempt to rewrite that story? I believe my brother is using Miss Brooks to work through his unresolved guilt about Sophia, Mary replied with painful honesty. He sees her as another victim he can save, but he's actually making her a victim of his own psychological needs. The testimony was particularly effective because it contained enough truth to be believable. Mario had been drawn to Christy partly because her situation resonated with his own experience of helplessness and trauma. But Mary's interpretation ignored the genuine love and respect that had developed between them. When Dr. Williams took the stand, she provided the medical context that Richard and Mary had deliberately obscured. Her testimony about Sophia's final treatment decisions was clinical, precise, and completely supportive of Mario's advocacy for his sister. Mr. Fessler asked exactly the questions a loving family member should ask, Dr. Williams testified. He wanted to understand Sophia's prognosis, her pain levels, her awareness of her surroundings. When it became clear that further treatment would only prolong suffering without offering hope, he helped his parents understand their options. Was there any indication that Mr. Fessler was motivated by factors other than Sophia's well-being? Absolutely not. His questions focused entirely on her comfort and dignity. He specifically asked about pain management, about whether she could hear them, about how to make her remaining time as peaceful as possible. Dr. Williams' testimony provided crucial medical credibility, but her ex-husband's attorney managed to twist even this positive evidence into something sinister. Doctor, isn't it unusual for an 18-year-old to take such an active role in end-of-life decisions? Not when that 18-year-old has spent months educating himself about his sister's condition and treatment options, Dr. Williams replied firmly. But such behavior could also indicate an unusual need to control other people's medical decisions, couldn't it? The question was designed to plant doubt, and Christie could see it working on some of the observers in the courtroom. Every piece of evidence about Mario's character was being systematically reframed as proof of manipulation. When Christie finally took the stand, she felt the weight of not just her own future, but Mario's reputation and life's work resting on her shoulders. Her ex-husband's attorney immediately attacked her credibility and motivations. "Miss Brooks, isn't it true that you were in desperate financial straits when you met Mr. Fessler?" "I was recovering from a difficult divorce," Christie replied carefully. "A divorce that left you with significant debt and limited resources?" "Yes. And Mr. Fessler appeared at exactly the moment when you were most vulnerable to offers of financial security?" "He appeared when I collapsed from exhaustion outside a courthouse," Christie corrected. "He took me to a hospital where he volunteers, not to his penthouse where he could impress me with his wealth." "But you did learn about his wealth eventually, didn't you?" "I learned about his deception," Christie replied with growing confidence, "and I walked away from him because of it." "Does that sound like someone motivated by money?" The attorney pressed harder, trying to paint her as either a calculating gold digger or a mentally unstable woman whose judgment couldn't be trusted. But Christie's nursing background served her well. She answered questions with clinical precision, refused to be baited into emotional outbursts, and consistently presented herself as a competent professional. When Rebecca put Mario on the stand, he spoke with quiet dignity about his love for Sophia, his guilt over her death, and his genuine feelings for Christie. His testimony was powerful, not because it denied his flaws, but because it acknowledged them while demonstrating how love had motivated his choices. "I made mistakes with Christie," Mario admitted. "I should have told her about my identity sooner. I should have trusted her to see past my wealth to who I really am. But every decision I made was motivated by love. Love for Sophia's memory, love for the families I work with at the hospital, and love for Christie herself. And if the court rules against you today, if your reputation is destroyed and your business empire is damaged," Mario looked directly at Christie as he answered, "then I'll have learned that some things are more important than reputation or wealth. I'll have learned that loving someone completely means being willing to lose everything else for them." As the testimony concluded and Judge Hernandez retired to consider her decision, Christie realized that regardless of the legal outcome, something fundamental had shifted between her and Mario. They'd been tested by fire and emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. The 15-minute recess felt like an eternity. Media speculation outside the courthouse ranged from predictions of Mario's complete professional destruction to theories about Christie's psychological manipulation of a grieving billionaire. The narrative battle was being fought on multiple fronts simultaneously. When Judge Hernandez returned, her expression was carefully neutral. This case presents complex questions about the intersection of trauma, love, and the potential for exploitation. After reviewing all testimony and evidence, I find. The courtroom held its collective breath as she paused, the silence stretching until it felt unbearable. I find that Mr. Brooks' emergency motion is without merit and appears to be retaliatory in nature. The divorce decree stands as final. Mr. Brooks is ordered to comply with all existing restraining orders and cease any further harassment of Miss Brooks. Relief flooded through Christie like a physical wave, but Judge Hernandez wasn't finished. However, I also find that this case raises serious questions about the responsibility wealthy individuals bear when entering relationships with people in vulnerable circumstances. While I cannot find evidence of deliberate exploitation, I encourage both parties to consider whether their relationship can survive the power imbalances and public scrutiny it has generated. The judge's words were a victory, but a complicated one. They'd won the legal battle, but the war for Mario's reputation and their relationship's survival was far from over. As they left the courthouse through another gauntlet of cameras and questions, Christie felt simultaneously victorious and terrified. They'd proven their love was real, but they'd also exposed it to a level of public scrutiny that would challenge even the strongest relationships. As they left the courthouse through another gauntlet of cameras and questions, Christy felt simultaneously victorious and terrified. The legal battle was over, but the emotional toll of having their most private feelings dissected in public felt overwhelming. "Come with me," Mario said as they reached his car, his voice rough with exhaustion and something deeper. "Please, I need to be alone with you." Christy nodded, too emotionally drained to do anything but follow his lead. The drive to his penthouse passed in charged silence, both of them processing the magnitude of what they'd just survived together. Mario's penthouse felt like a sanctuary after the chaos of the courthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city where they'd fought for their right to love each other. But inside, the space felt intimate and protected. "We did it," Christy said finally, the words feeling surreal. "We actually won." "We more than won," Mario replied, moving toward her with the intensity of a man who'd been holding himself back for too long. "We proved that what we have is real, that it's worth fighting for." When he reached her, Mario's hands came up to frame her face with infinite tenderness. "Christy, I need you to know something. Everything I said in that courtroom, everything I risked today, I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "Mario," she whispered, seeing the depth of his love reflected in his eyes. "No, let me finish," he said, his thumbs tracing along her cheekbones. "For weeks, I've been terrified that the world would see our love as something dirty or manipulative. But today, standing in that courtroom, declaring my feelings for you in front of everyone, I've never been more proud of anything in my life." Tears began to fall down Christy's cheeks, but they were tears of relief and overwhelming love. "I was so scared I was going to lose you. When Mary testified, when Richard painted you as some kind of predator." "You could never lose me," Mario interrupted fiercely. "Not to family, not to public opinion, not to anything. What we have transcends all of that." "Show me," Christy breathed, the words escaping before she could think. Something shifted in Mario's expression, desire replacing the careful restraint he'd maintained throughout their ordeal. "Are you sure? After everything we've been through today, I don't want you to feel—" "I feel free," Christy said, stepping closer until their bodies were almost touching. "For the first time since this nightmare began, I feel completely free to love you without fear." "Christy," Mario said, her name sounding like a prayer on his lips. "I love you," she said, the words carrying all the weight of everything they'd survived. "I love your strength, your compassion, the way you fight for what matters. I love how you see me, not as someone to save, but as someone worth choosing." The kiss that followed was different from all their previous moments, deeper, more urgent, filled with the knowledge that they'd weathered the worst storm imaginable and emerged stronger. Mario's hands tangled in her hair while Christy's fingers worked at the buttons of his shirt, both of them desperate to feel skin against skin after weeks of forced distance. "I need you," Mario murmured against her lips. "I need to feel you, to know this is real." "Then take me," Christy replied, her voice steady despite the desire coursing through her. "All of me, no more holding back." Mario swept her into his arms, carrying her to his bedroom, where the city lights created a romantic glow through the massive windows. As he laid her down on the bed, his touch was reverent, as if he was handling something infinitely precious. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his hands exploring the curves of her body with worshipful attention. "So incredibly beautiful." "So are you," Christy replied, marveling at the play of light across his chest as he removed his shirt. "You're beautiful and strong and mine." "Yours," Mario agreed, his voice rough with want. "Completely yours." They undressed each other slowly, savoring each revealed inch of skin. The urgency of their desire was tempered by the knowledge that they had all the time in the world now. No more threats, no more secrets, nothing but their love for each other. When Mario's mouth found the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder, Christy arched beneath him, a soft sound of pleasure escaping her lips. "I love the sounds you make," he murmured against her skin. "I love how you respond to my touch. I love how you make me feel." Christy gasped as his hands and mouth continued their exploration. "Like I'm the only woman in the world." "You are," Mario said with absolute conviction. "You're my world." Their lovemaking began with tender reverence, each touch and caress a celebration of their hard-won freedom to be together. But as desire built between them, tenderness gave way to passion, gentle exploration becoming urgent need. "I want all of you," Christy whispered as they moved together in increasing harmony. "Everything you are, everything you feel. You have it," Mario replied, his voice strained with emotion and desire. "You have all of me." When he finally joined with her completely, it was with a sense of coming home that transcended the physical. They moved together in perfect synchronization, hearts beating as one, souls connecting in ways that went beyond anything they'd experienced before. "This," Mario breathed as they climbed toward the peak together. "This is what I was fighting for. This connection, this love, this absolute certainty that we belong together." "Yes," Christy gasped, her body trembling with the intensity of sensation and emotion. "This is everything." When release finally claimed them, it was with an intensity that left them both shaking. They clung to each other as waves of pleasure and profound love washed over them, understanding that they'd just shared something that would bind them together forever. "I love you," Mario whispered, as they lay tangled together in the aftermath, his arms holding her as if he never intended to let go. "I love you too," Christy replied, pressing kisses to his chest where his heart still raced. "More than I ever thought possible." They made love again as the city settled into evening around them, this time with the slow, deliberate pace of lovers who knew they had conquered every obstacle between them. Each touch was a promise, each kiss a vow, each whispered endearment a declaration that nothing would ever separate them again. "What happens now?" Christy asked as they lay watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "Now we build a life together," Mario said, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "We get married, we work side by side at the hospital. We create a family, if you want one. We do all the normal, beautiful things that people in love do." "Normal," Christy laughed softly. "I don't think anything about us will ever be normal." "Maybe not," Mario agreed with a smile. "But it will be ours. And after everything we've been through, I think that's more than enough." As they drifted toward sleep, still entwined in each other's arms, both knew that they'd crossed a threshold from which there was no return. They belonged to each other now, completely and irrevocably, having proven that their love could survive any storm. The battles they'd fought, the pain they'd endured, the risks they'd taken, all of it had led to this moment of perfect peace in each other's arms. And whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together, protected by a love that had already proven itself unbreakable. Outside, the city sparkled with millions of lights, each one representing a life, a story, a dream. But inside Mario's penthouse, wrapped in each other's arms, Christy and Mario had found something more precious than any fortune. They had found their forever. 6 months later, Mario and Christy stood together in the newly expanded Sophia Fessler Pediatric Wing at Denver General, watching families navigate their own impossible journeys with children facing serious illnesses. The media attention had eventually died down, but the lessons learned from their public trial by fire had fundamentally changed how they approached their relationship. "Do you ever regret it?" Christy asked as they observed a father reading to his daughter during her chemotherapy treatment. "Fighting for us so publicly? The damage to your business relationships? The strain with Mary?" "I regret the pain it caused other people," Mario replied, his arm tightening around her waist. "But I could never regret choosing love over fear." The pediatric wing thrived under their combined advocacy. Christy had launched her pediatric advocacy program with Mario's backing, creating support systems for families that addressed both medical and emotional needs. Their partnership had evolved from rescue and protection into something more balanced and collaborative. Mary remained estranged, unable to forgive what she saw as Mario's betrayal of family loyalty. Richard's journalistic career had suffered when his personal vendetta was exposed, but the relationship damage within the family felt permanent. "I have something for you," Mario said, producing a small velvet box that made Christy's heart skip several beats. "Mario, you don't have to." "I want to," he interrupted, dropping to one knee right there in the hospital corridor where they'd first found each other. Christy Brooks, you've taught me that love isn't about protection or control or trying to rewrite the past. It's about choosing each other every day, even when the world is watching and judging and waiting for us to fail. The ring was perfect, simple, elegant, with a clarity that reminded her of everything she'd learned about seeing past surface appearances to recognize what was truly valuable. "Will you marry me?" Mario asked. "Not because you need rescuing, and not because I need to save anyone, but because we've built something together that's stronger than both of our individual damages." "Yes," Christy whispered, then louder. "Yes, absolutely yes." As Mario slipped the ring onto her finger, hospital staff began gathering to witness their engagement. The same people who'd watched their relationship weather impossible odds now celebrated the love that had survived public scrutiny and family betrayal. But even in this moment of perfect happiness, Christy caught sight of the familiar figure watching from the end of the corridor. Her ex-husband stood near the hospital's main entrance, his expression unreadable as he observed their engagement celebration. He'd been released from jail just 3 days earlier, after serving 6 months for violating the restraining order. And the look in his eyes suggested that 6 months in prison had only intensified his obsession with reclaiming control over the woman who dared to choose love over his manipulation. The shadow of her ex-husband's presence couldn't diminish the joy of their engagement. But it served as a reminder that some battles require constant vigilance. As Mario and Christy walked hand in hand through the pediatric wing they'd helped transform, they understood that love wasn't a destination, but a daily choice to protect and nurture what they'd built together. Their story had taught them that authentic love requires courage, the courage to be vulnerable, despite past betrayals, to choose trust over self-protection, and to fight for each other when the world questions your worthiness. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about perfect people finding each other, but about wounded souls choosing to heal together. In the weeks that followed their engagement, Christy and Mario would face new challenges as they planned their future. Her ex-husband's release from prison would bring fresh threats and complications. Mary's continued estrangement would test Mario's resolve about choosing love over family loyalty. The media attention surrounding their relationship would create pressures neither had anticipated. But they would face these challenges as partners, equals who'd learned that true protection comes not from one person shielding another, but from two people standing together against whatever storms might come. The pediatric patients who witnessed their engagement that day would grow up hearing the story of the nurse and the billionaire who proved that love could survive anything when it was built on genuine respect, shared values, and the courage to choose each other repeatedly, no matter what the cost. Have you ever had to choose between someone who was cruelly honest or someone who lied to protect both your hearts? Sometimes the deepest love requires the greatest risk. Tell me what choice you would make, and share this story if it touched your heart. Like this video if you believe in love that conquers all obstacles, and subscribe for tomorrow's story about another love that transforms both lives forever.